two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
This is the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 29th of January 2018. Our last production for the month of January. We've already rolled through basically the first month of January. Nonetheless, from WBRN Radio in Boston on the Boston Red Network. H was asking me about the Boston Red Network. What it is a collection of programs that we do from our political program, which is Boston Red, our macroeconomics program known as Numbers Man. Sorry about the sexist title, but when we started the program many years ago, we didn't really think about it at the time. But nonetheless, we've added other programs, our international program, which we will have later tonight. We'll present DJ Trump. The title of that episode is America's First Goes to the World Economic Forum. DJ Trump was there. He gave his address. He had a band there with him, 224-year-old marching band that Dr. Schwab put there. It was a carnival none the least. But anyway, it was there. Professor out of Berkeley. Let's see. Name kind of hit me here. Passed by me for some reason there. Anyway, we'll think of him sooner or later. He made his comment in the San Francisco paper, I believe, Stiglitz. Anyway, Professor Stiglitz, a world-renowned economist, said it just was not fitting for the World Economic Forum. But many things DJ Trump does is not fitting for family viewing, whether it's some of his more crude remarks or just his remarks, period. Nonetheless, that is one program, and our technical program, we advise you to look at it. We're talking about security, particularly security in things like my Social Security, ATMs very widely used. Number of actors now are accessing those particular things, particularly the ones made by the company DeBolt. DeBolt also makes voting machines. They're one of the bigger makers of those. So they've been targeted. In the past, people have targeted those ATMs in, say, Mexico and various other places. Now they've come to the States, according to the Secret Service. Yes, the Secret Service is indeed tasked with, because at one time they're now Homeland Security, but they were a part of the Treasury Department, and they were, one of their tasks was counterfeiters. The biggest part of theirs, presidential protection, was just one part of the Secret Service, but primarily they were engaged in dealing with counterfeiters, the money supply, etc. Nonetheless, that is one of our programs, open source, of course, meaning software that is used, that can be used by an individual, a company, etc., and depending on the license and modification, placed back into quote-unquote the community. You had Dan Rabbit talk about community. A lot of people talk about various types of communities. Corporations even sponsor on the side communities. If you look at Red Hat and some of these various people out there, Microsoft used to sponsor user groups as communities. The reason we're getting into this, we are kind of a segue to the Koch brothers. We'll talk about their quote-unquote community and what they plan to do in the body politic. In fact, old man Koch had literally had the audacity to quote the freedom fighter and abolitionist publisher there as what he does. I'll have to get that, Frederick Douglass. I'll have to get that quote in a minute here as we get out of our segue in here. But nonetheless, we are moving also to the Android platform. We've been on the Android platform through Stitcher and various other of these outlets for mobile devices. So you can get us there, or on iHeart, that is one, on Stitcher, on Streaker, you can get us there, and various others. The YouTube production is there. We'll start to work more on the YouTube production as we integrate video in. At one time, we did, in fact, do video at least once a week on live stream. What happened there was live stream used to maintain those live streams there for time immemorial, at least for a year or so. Now it's only 30 days unless they have changed that. So basically, if you do a video production, you'd have to take it down and move it to YouTube, or perhaps, as Professor Reich does, you could put it on Facebook. So in other words, there are many ways of doing this in social media, but the most important thing is content. You need to have some type of content going on here. Incidentally, the NHL actually had their All-Star game. We'll talk a little bit about that. Got cut a bit flat-footed there with them, how they do their All-Star game as opposed to others. Most of the All-Star games, for instance, in the NFL, you have the top teams through an elimination process between the various divisions, the AFC and the NFC, and of course they would end up playing the big one called the Super Bowl. In the NBA, that's the National Basketball Association, you have the East and West type of teams in their All-Star game, which is coming up also. And of course in baseball, you have an elimination of the National and American leagues, you have divisional and playoffs, you have plenty of things going on. And even in college ball now, football, they have the various regional things, the Southeast conferences. Those conferences have been expanded. Many of them originally were, say, only 8 colleges. Now they're up to 12 colleges, etc. But you have those divisions, and then, of course, you get into your bowl games, and now you have a national championship. Incidentally, Alabama won the national championship. So this is, the NHL is sort of doing that. They have their divisions, and then there's an elimination process, and then the final. We'll get to that in a minute here, but let's go to the infamous Koch brothers here and their network. They were in Indian Wells, California, outside of Palm Springs. These were, quote-unquote, what they call mega donors. That's not the case anymore. Now you do have, in fact, mega donors, but a lot of these, that's a ticket to get in. It's $100,000, at least $100,000 annually to various groups. I guess they didn't have to put it up all at once. But nonetheless, they are now in agreement with DJ Trump. The Koch brothers are libertarians, and this is one of the things to note about the libertarians. The libertarians are a very right-of-center operation, and so thus they could get in there on areas of disagreement where they were once outspoken, such as supporting free trade. They are free traders, advocating more open borders and opposing deficit spending. That used to be a big item for the Koch brothers. Network officials now tread carefully to downplay the division and avoid agonizing DJ Trump. You have to meet people where they are. That is a kind of the same. This is Mark Holder. He's a network official of the Koch and general counsel of Koch Industries. which the Koch brothers have everything from, Bounty paper towels to all sorts of stuff. So this is the basic thing. I remember an old comrade once told me we have to work with what we got. And at the time, we had not the best, but working with them. Anyway, this is the approach they're taking. Tim Phillips is president of Americans for Prosperity Network's main advocacy arm, praised Trump's staff for involving the network in talks from day one on tax code. Tax code being very important to these industrialists here. Phillips said 2017 was the most productive year, no doubt, from his in the existence of the network at the federal level. Lots of policies were put forth in the first year that have been very good ones. He added, we really don't get caught up in all the extraterrestrial stuff there. Anyway, in the coming year, the network looks to further influence federal policy to protect GOP majorities in Congress. Now, this is one of the things, is a very, very tricky thing with these GOP majorities in Congress and with the plans of the particularly Democratic Party. As the activist Cindy Sheehan said, basically they are running a bunch of hillbillies, and I kind of cleaned that up a little bit, but primarily that is what is going on there. So the big argument, do you deal with neocons or do you deal with these middle-of-the-road, right-of-center Democrats, such as Joe Meacham out of West Virginia? So that is one of the big things here. Old Charles Koch, he's 82 years old, described the collaboration for his collaboration for philosophy as being willing to work with anyone, even if they agree on only one issue. This is where he quotes, we are increasingly following the philosophy made by Frederick Douglass, such as effective social change enterprise. Koch said, referring to the famous abolitionist, even the infamous DJ Trump referred to Frederick Douglass. He's rolling over in his grave as donors sip cocktails on a lavish green lawn with a view of pink-humed mountains. And that is, as he put it, unite with anyone to do right and no one to do wrong. Well, we take him for his words there. He's united with DJ Trump, I suppose. Anyway, one of the top priorities has been overhaul of the criminal justice system. Now, this is where they are a little bit different from a lot of right-wing groups. For the past several years, leaders of the group have been pushing to roll back mandatory minimum sentencing laws and stiffen the burden of proof for the government to put people in prison. That's more of a libertarian standpoint. The effort seemed doomed when Beauregard Sessions appeared on the scene and has been the single biggest opponent of reform, no doubt about it. He's ordered U.S. attorneys to prosecute crimes to the fullest extent. These people like Beauregard Sessions always will do that rather than loudly criticize Sessions. The network has sorted out common ground and sympathetic allies within the administration. It's decided to focus on pushing legislation and programs to help convicts re-enter society, in part because the network officials believe they have persuaded Sessions and DJ Trump to support these efforts. Well, that in itself is a long shot. Holder, who was once a correctional official in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, he spent the past several months in talks with about the efforts of Jared Kushner. Now, Kushner's father was known as Jailbird Kushner. He was in jail for 2 years for income tax evasion, witness tampering, illegal donations. A complete crook. The experiences informed him, Holder said of Jared Kushner in an interview. How could it not? Well, no doubt about that. Anyway, in 2016, Charles Koch called Trump's proposed Muslim ban apathetic to our approach, and described and suggested that Trump might be requiring Muslims to register as a reminder of Nazi Germany. But this weekend, the network put on a carefully worded statement praising the immigration framework of DJ Trump. It offered support for granting permanent legal status to the Dreamers. Ben Hooks, president of the Charles Koch Foundation, urged reporters to emphasize the nuanced techniques and note that his team had been talking about the issue with the White House. He said that it's important to convince the Koch network thinks that Trump's proposals is thoughtful, specific in how it offers legal certainty to the Dreamers. Well, it's offered legal uncertainty to the Dreamers. Frank Baxter, he used to be an ambassador to Uruguay under G.W. Bush, who did not support Trump, is presently surprised at some of the outcomes so far and hopes for a national, this is only words. Baxter is a founding board member of charter school in Los Angeles, but what I am beginning to see is him stumbling towards a good immigration policy, something I care very much about. Several other donors in interviews said they were happy with moves by the national leaders of the GOP. That explains exactly where they are. Douglas Dean, a business type from Dallas, supported Trump's bid. In its course, they repealed the individual mandates, which was a mistake. That was great, but essentially a shot in the hole at the boat of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. We're very pleased with that. This weekend's gathering is the largest donor meeting since Koch began hosting the gathering in 2003. There were roughly 700 investors who contributed a minimum of $100,000 annually to the network. About 550 came to California for the confab, and 160 were first-time people attending. Some of the people from the Congress that appeared, this Mark Meadows, this nut from North Carolina, the Conservative Caucus. Marsha Blackburn, she's from Tennessee. And Thor Tillis, a senator from North Carolina, gerrymandered North Carolina. Some guy I had not heard of this, Todd Young out of Indiana. Cornyn of Texas, had heard of him. Oh, and old Matt Blevin, the governor of Kentucky. It shows you kinds of people there. Blevin has done more to destroy health care in the state of Kentucky than anyone, period. Now, let me kind of jump around here a little bit. This is from the Washington Post, not that we use, but from Medicaid. Republicans now are jumping on a bandwagon to expand Medicaid. These are so-called moderate Republicans, which means that at one time they would go while the conservatives. Anyway, to expand for the poor, as party holdouts who blocked the expansion said that they are now open because of primarily the new requirements, work requirements. In Idaho, conservative lawmakers who steadfastly opposed Medicaid expansion in the past said the new requirements make him open to the idea. Same thing going on in Wyoming, who previously opposed expansion, a key part of course, President Obama's Obamacare. Moderate Republicans in North Carolina, Virginia, and Kansas are similarly renewing calls to take Medicare expansion. Now, if successful, the efforts could make hundreds of thousands of Americans newly eligible for health coverage, while also opening the door to Medicaid changes that could kick some current beneficiaries out of the program and reduce benefits to others, broadening the reach into red states, but definitely with a conservative bent. So it's not something that is very good there. So you're having these characters that in the past oppose it. Now, the work requirement, that is in Kentucky, where Blevin is. And that requirement goes across most of the state, but some of the more hard-hit parts of the state don't have it. So 10 states have already filed a request for waivers. The Trump administration, of course, approved Kentucky. What that means is recipients that on Medicaid that are able to work would work to satisfy the requirements. Also, they would increase the amounts that people will pay. So in other words, although they would get Medicare, they could end up spending $25, $30, or $40 for a doctor's visit. Period. 17 other states are overwhelmingly, GOP-dominated. Many Democrats and some moderate Republicans repeatedly have attempted expansion, hope to take advantage of some of these programs, but it would depend on what state you're in. Out in Utah, Herbert there said in a statement, Utah has 46,000 residents who could gain insurance under an expansion. That's according to the Kaiser Foundation, although the plan being discussed would probably cover lower numbers. Incidentally, he called it a window of opportunity. Well, one of the things what happens here is in Kansas came in within 3 votes of overriding a veto by Sam Brownback, who evidently only got it confirmed to go to the Vatican because of the Vice President Pence. Moderate Republicans are hoping the work requirement would be enough to get the proposal over the finishing line, but it's unclear if Brownback's replacement, another Republican, would support the deal. This gives us an opportunity, something to run with, no doubt about that. Barbara Bourla said she's a Republican there. The Affordable Care Act is sorted to extend Medicare to every American. Incidentally, Bernie Sanders had a national meeting on this, and we'll have to get that particular audio up into one of our programs here. In Virginia, Democrats picked up more than a dozen seats last fall, and Republicans hold only 2-seat advantage in the House. And in the Senate, a moderate Republican seeking a bipartisan deal to pair expansion with a work requirement. A spokesman for Mr. Northam, he is the governor of Virginia, a Democrat, said does not support the work requirement, but the very initial conversation about expansion are going there. In other words, perhaps have a lesser one in North Carolina. Ray Cooper there, he's a Democrat, is pleased with some movement on expansion, and I'll have to see, is concerned about the work requirement. The problem is what kind of work they're going to do. This has been one of the things Republicans have always come up with, the work requirement. Well, what happens with something like Medicaid, if people are too sick to work, they will not work. And many of the people that would normally take the program up, depending on the work requirement and fees that they have to pay. If they have a work requirement and are these fees that they are pushing on people that have very, very little disposable income to begin with, a lot of people, unless they absolutely have to have it, will avoid it. The whole idea of these programs is preventive care, and you don't have preventive care where this sort of thing happens. On immigration, well, looking at 2 or 3 sources here, there's a lot of Democrats have voiced opposition that the future path to citizenship, this is 1.8 million dreamers in exchange for the $25 billion border wall. Some Republicans, but negotiations have gone too far afield ahead of the March. There's a March 5th deadline, incidentally, out there for 690,000 dreamers that could have their citizenship upended. From Susan Collin, I kind of handicapped these talk shows a little bit. She called Trump's proposal to reform immigration very important, but very complicated, no doubt. And the devil's in the details, as Harry Reid would say. here, and this Mark Short character keeps popping up. One of the Koch brother types around there plans would terminate the ability of U.S. citizens to apply for green cards awaiting permanent residency for their parents and siblings. Estimates the proposal would annually drop the number of green cards by at least 288,000, 36%. Now, in other meetings there, well, I'll get to the vulgar words here. From Glenn Chung, Director of the Government Relations for the American Immigration Lawyers Association, said the president's bid to slash family immigration in Texas back generations to a time far more restrictive immigration in the 20th century. This is since 1965. That's been pointed out. Nancy Pelosi called it a more white America bill. Initially favored those from European countries, but since it's evolved, and this is what happens a lot of times in legislation, into Asians and Latin Americans. Because, first of all, European populations, less and less Europeans are coming. The people they've had in recent years that have been coming have been from the old Soviet republics, primarily, and not from necessarily from other quote-unquote European countries. Europe has an economy there. It's striking that the new administration wants to entertain a whole litany of topics that amount to comprehensive reform. This is what Mr. Chin said. What is likely to get done in this environment is something much more limited. No doubt about it. You add a bunch of factors on, and the situation itself becomes very, very limited. Let me just throw one thing in here. The 5G network, we've talked about that a lot on the open source report. 5G being a much speedier, faster network. A lot of the telecoms have been working on it for quite some time. The Trump administration is proposing to build our own 5G network, addressing what it sees as China's threat to cybersecurity and the American economy. Now, what they have done is Howie and ZTE headsets, or mobile phones. They have severely limited their ability here, claiming subsidies and all sorts of wacko ideas. We want to build a network so China can't listen to us. Anyway, this is farcical. Major wireless carriers have spent billions of dollars buying a spectrum as FM space to launch their 5G networks. Unclear if the federal government would have enough spectrum to build their own. Well, they could get some spectrum there. Moreover, Accenture has estimated wireless operators will invest as much as $275 billion in the U.S. over 7 years to build a 5G network. The T-Mobile's Dish Corporation, T-Mobile spent $8 billion. Dish Corporation $6.2 billion to win the bulk of broadcast airways spectrum for sale in a government option. Part of the problem is you have to plan this ahead of the time. I don't know how much spectrum is left there, but the government could get together a national network with virtually unlimited funds. This would be a drop in the bucket. It would be one thing DJ Trump could give to the people of the U.S. if it's a government-owned network that people could access at reasonable amounts. But if you're going to build a network, you have to have a national internet company to be on this network. If you don't have that, now this was a presentation that asking for the national security officials, if they build a network, it would rent access to carriers. Well, at what rates? They should also grant access to nonprofit groups, cities, and anyone else that wants it. And this is one of the big problems here. Let me just finish this up and check out what time here. Okay. Out to Hawaii there. The governor in Hawaii has an early, David Egg has IGE, I guess that's how you pronounce his name. Anyway, he has something called the Early College Initiative there, where students in high school take enough college-level courses to earn an associate degree with their secondary. A very innovative idea. The man is an engineer. Unfortunately, he was a victim of the missile alert that was not a missile alert there. And during an interview in his office at State Capitol last week, he first performed yet another mea culpa for the entire mess. The error was truly unacceptable occurrence. Then he explained that he, like other state officials, did not pay enough attention to his Twitter feed, leaving it to his staff, in contrast, of course, with DJ Trump, who was always on Twitter. Obviously, I don't do my own Twitter. That's a mistake there. So, in other words, I think they even had a problem, came up with a question that it took X minutes before he had a post on Twitter. Politicians face many challenges, but Egg may be alone in having to answer to a constituency in which every single member confronted the possibility of death. Well, no doubt about it. From Bert Opengard, a journalism professor at the university, I had 10 minutes to live. Well, yeah, if it were real there. So there's a big governor's race coming up. Kathleen Hibiscus, we've supported her in the past, is running for governor. And Toshi Gabbard is the other Congress-type, progressive-type member of Our Revolution. Praised Hibiscus as a strong, decisive, and dynamic leader, and was not shy about invoking the false alarm. No doubt about it. So the false alarm is now on Mr. Egg there. State politics bear resemblance, according to Bill Dorman of Hawaii Public Radio. That's kind of interesting how things shake out there. The long dominance of the Liberal Party, Liberal Democratic Party in Japan means that nearly all substantive battles fractional battles within the majority party. That's what happens here too. No doubt about it. Egg informal faction in the legislature was called the Chess Group, a group of policy wogs. He explained that the bloc was named by his daughter of one of its members, saying that their seriousness brought to mind the spirit of her high school chess club. So that is him. This is an article here from one of our favorite, DJ Dion. We have to mention that one. So let's go and do the sports here. We'll start with college basketball. Villanova and Marquette. Villanova 85-82 over Marquette. Purdue number 3. Villanova's number 1, incidentally. 74-67 over Indiana. Michigan State, much maligned there. We'll see what happens. That president resigned. Various other heads are rolling there. From the gymnastics, Doctors 74-68 over Maryland. Tulsa, number 17, Wichita State, a blowaway there. Wichita State 92-71. Clemson, number 18, and Georgia Tech, a 2-point game. Clemson 72-70. On to the National Basketball Association. The Bucks were in Chicago and beat the Bulls, something they used to not do since Kareem was there. 110-96. The Suns were in Denver. The Rockets 113-1. The Rockies, the Rockets. Excuse me, in Houston. Anyway, 113-102. The Clippers were at the Pelicans. Clippers 112-103. The Pistons and Cavaliers in Denver. Cavs won a game there, 121-104. The Lakers and Raptors in Toronto. The Raptors 123 to 113. The 76ers and Thunder. Yeah, the Thunder won, I believe, their 7th or 8th straight game, 122 to 112. And finally, the Kings and Spurs in San Antonio. Spurs 113 to 98 there in that. That's the Houston Rockets. I'm not sure why I figured Rocky Mountain. Sorry about that. The NHL, they're finally back to work after the All-Star game. They're not back to work. Sorry about that. These are the various divisions within the All-Star game. I get right here. The Central, the Pacific 5 to 2, and the Metro and Atlantic's Atlantic 7 to 4. And then the Pacific and Atlantic, this is how their All-Star game went. The Pacific 5 to 2 in that contest. This is the All-Star game final. Let me just go back up here a minute. The semifinals, the Central Division with the Pacific Division won out 5 to 2 there. And then we have another semifinal that the Atlantic and the Metro were playing here, and the Atlantic won out. And then we had the final, and the Pacific won out 5 to 2. Sometimes there's a little bit of here. Let me just get a better story I was looking at earlier here from one of these hockey powerhouses out in the Midwest in Minnesota. They were talking about the NHL final. You would expect that to happen in a place, even in the NFL All-Star game, the Central couldn't can't stray from its tight ways anyway. This was played incidentally in Tampa, Florida. Back-checking, highlighting, reeling, anyway, whatever. Here, even 3-on-3, the NHL elite couldn't snap the Central Division's players out of defensive struggles. They headlined much of their play during the season, no doubt about it. They've had their problems. Opening up the second half goal for the Knights defense. Anyway, I won't go into who all these people were, but after the Pacific took over there, and the Pacific, we just in the Avalanche. So, basically speaking, we end up with the Pacific on top. And that was the end of that story there. And so much for the NHL hockey. One other story here out of Stockton, California. Jerry Pippin used to have an associate in Stockton, California, if I can find it in time. Yeah, it doesn't appear we will. But anyway, Stockton, California has a national guaranteed income program, and we'll get that to you when here we go. The first city in the U.S. on the 27-year-old mayor there, Mr. Michael Tibbs, an African-American there. They made news, Stockton, California did, when they went bankrupt. But Tibbs would likely begin sometime in August of this year. It will only involve 100 people, but various income ranges. They'll get $500 a month for 3 years. So that will be one of the things, become a symbol for the rest of America, no doubt about that. Tibbs, from Stanford, who first developed basic income idea of reading the late Dr. Martin Luther King. So period. Unlike many places, excuse me, the basic income discussion, he doesn't believe that the idea is as radical as many plainly progressive. He sees the radicalness, but I'm trying to solve the problem that every community has had. He told a Business Insider he believes that Stockton is really a microcosm of the rest of America. Low-income people haven't gotten a fair shake here. many incomes are well below the California average. In Stockton, and healthcare and retail are the city's two biggest industries. Well, they definitely need healthcare. A lot of things have changed in that city. Has partnered with the Economic Security Project, and we'll do something on this and get back to Stockton, what happened to Stockton there. As Jerry Pippin used to say, you'd hear a bunch of Okie accents going around Stockton. He used to work with a guy named Pitts, one of these right-wing types that was a teacher there in Oakland, in Stockton for many, many, many years. We'll have to see his take on that. Nonetheless, this will do it for us. Have a good week, everyone. We'll talk to you next week on the Monday Morning Quarterback, and we're on the 29th of January, 2018.